Hey everyone, I'm Dave, Dave Sedia. Thanks for being here. Say hey in the chat. Where was everyone from? Like 2 p.m. here. I'm in like Boston area. Hey Fred. Hi Anna. I don't know about Vue. I haven't played with Vue actually. It's on my list of things to play around with, but I have not gotten around to it yet. Played with Svelte though. Svelte's cool. London, cool. Hey Jonathan. So today I was thinking of I'd go over kind of how I learned React and kind of a general strategy for like approaching React. And I think it applies to a lot of things, but sort of breaking the problem down into smaller bits and then like learning one thing at a time. And so this is going to be very definitely more basics side of things. If you've been using React a while, this is probably going to be a lot of review for you. But if you're getting started with React, I think this will be helpful. So let me share my screen here. So I'm going to start off with Code Sandbox. I think Code Sandbox is a really it's a nice tool. It's really easy to get started with. You don't have to install anything. You just go to codesandbox.io / actually if you go to like /s/new, this will create a React app. I'll paste that in the chat if you want to follow along. So once it finishes what it's doing here, so it gives us a kind of a bare bones React app here with a function and some other stuff. And I think it's actually good to figure out what all this stuff does by deleting it all and starting from scratch. I feel like I don't know if anyone else is like this, but I feel like kind of this worry in the back of my mind, like if I don't really know like what's this import doing, what's this render thing doing, I like to play around with it all and figure out like what is each line doing, why does this have to be here, could I delete this line, would it still work, and that kind of thing. So I'm gonna, let's see, to give us a little more space here, I think I'll just hide this side thing, and then we'll have the app and some code on the right, or code on the left anyway. So when I was learning React, I think my intro to it was this article by James K. Nelson called Raw React, or Learn Raw React. So he boiled it down to just JavaScript basically. So the only stuff in this file that is not JavaScript right now is this JSX stuff, right? So like the stuff that looks like HTML, the stuff being returned from the component, and this app thing down here. So everything else is like regular JavaScript syntax. And I think that was helpful. So I think I'll go through the same kind of thing here. We can create kind of like raw React elements, and you can see how that works. So I'm going to start with an empty file here, and we'll build it up. So the first thing we need for a React app is to import React from React. And this actually has to be called like React with a capital R because it's you'll see in a second where we're going to be using that for creating elements. And then we need React DOM from React-DOM. I don't think this one has to have this name, but it usually does. So these are the two pieces. The React one will let us write JSX and create elements, and then React DOM will let us actually get something on the page. So we can use React DOM.render, and the first argument to render is just like whatever we want to render. So we could like render the string hi if we want. And the second argument is going to be where we want to put this in the document. So let me open up our public directory here, index.html. So this is the page that's displayed over here. And in the body tag, you can see we've got this div with an ID of root. So if we want to put the React app into there, basically replacing everything in here with React, then we can say document.query selector and look for #root. And this is a built-in browser API. It'll find that element and then render the word hi into it. And we're not even using the React package at this point. We're just like rendering a string. So let's see if this works. If I save this, does it work? Oh no. Hey, there we go. Cool. So we get hi. So this is like the simplest possible thing. Barely using React at this point, but we can replace this with a call to react.create element. And this is actually what, when you write things like div in JSX, this is actually what React is compiling it down, or what Babel's compiling it down to. So it's going to be running this React create element thing and passing in the string div and creating an empty div. And then we can pass in as the second argument is any props that we wanted to pass. So if we wanted to pass like attributes like class name equals whatever, that would go here. And then the third argument is what to put inside the element. So that's like all the stuff here, otherwise known as children. So we can call this like, we'll just put the string hello. And so if we open this up in the element inspector, we can see, oh, hey, Bob, how's it going? We can see we've got this div that says hello. And if we change this div thing here to like h1 or whatever, React is going to re-render. Actually, I guess Code Sandbox is going to re-render, and we get this h1 here. So this is the core of React, really. And if we the JSX equivalent of this would be like an h1 that said hello in it, right? And we can write this. We could do this instead. This will work fine. So we do that instead of this create element thing, and this does literally the exact same thing. So that's kind of bare bones React stuff, right? So, and you can nest elements this way. If you really want to create element this way, if you don't like writing JSX for some reason, you can nest create elements all you want. So we could have like inside the h1, let's put this back to a div actually. Inside the h1, we could have another element. Maybe we call React create element again. And this one will be a span. No props. And we can say hello. And we can have another word. We can have another span that says world. And we've got our elements here. So this is, I'm hoping to sort of demystify this JSX syntax a bit. So when you write stuff like this, it's really just compiling down to create element calls. So I think like if you're approaching a new framework, React in particular, or really anything, I think it's useful to figure out like what is it actually doing under the hood. So this is what React is doing under the hood, and let's go a little further, and we can pull this stuff out into a function. So if we were to like make a function called hello, this is like a regular JavaScript function, right? And we return all this stuff. Say we turn this, I'm going to save, and hopefully it'll format the file. Oh yeah, sure. We'll call hello down here. With all the commas. Sweet. Yeah, so this works the same way. All we've done is just move that code, right? It's the same code, but it's in a function now. And so this function can be used as a React component. Because it has a capital letter, we can change this function call into a JSX expression like that, and it'll render out fine. And we can also use React create element. So what this is actually doing is passing the hello function itself into React create element. And that's going to give us the same output too. So really it's create element all the way down. Like this is what JSX is doing behind the scenes. So let's see, what else could we do? I'm going to try just sort of experimenting with the syntax a bit. So let's say we have, start switching some of this stuff over to JSX instead. So we'll write our hello down here. Get rid of that. And that's working. And then we can change this into the equivalent JSX is going to be a div. And then inside the div, we've got two spans. First one says hello. And the second one says world. Cool. We can comment all that stuff out because we're not using that anymore. And we've got the same thing. Let me put some exclamation points in so you can see that it's actually changed. Sweet. So, yeah, so this is like one step closer to regular looking React. So I think when I was learning the syntax, one of the first things I did was like try to figure out like how to break it. I think kind of learning the bounds of the syntax is helpful. So like in this case, what if we wanted to put this on multiple lines, right? We want to say like return all that stuff. And well, we instantly get an error because we can't do this. If you do this in JavaScript, this is the same thing as saying return undefined, and that's not going to do anything. So that makes sense. Okay, so maybe we can wrap it in parentheses. Then that tells JavaScript that the expression is spanning multiple lines, and that still works. Sweet. So what else could we do? Maybe we want to put a space between hello and world. So if we wanted to, if we put like a new line in here, what's it do? We don't get a space. Okay, what if we put some spaces? Nope. I think Prettier removed them for us. That was helpful. How about we put spaces inside braces? Ah, interesting. So it joins them together. So behind the scenes here, if you haven't used Prettier before, Prettier is a formatting tool that automatically formats your file, and it'll like figure out like the optimal way to lay things out. So if you can do this instead of that messy thing that we had with this, then Prettier will try to make that happen. Yeah, you can nest. Oh hey, other Dave. You can nest create elements. Yeah, so that's what's going on here. So this is really a nested like a create element span inside a create element div, and you can keep going. Like every element you nest is just another create element inside a create element. Just a big tree of them. Cool. So let's see how we could. So this is with this knowledge here. If you know how to write JSX like this, and you know some HTML, because all this stuff is it's basically HTML, or it looks a lot like HTML, then you can pretty much replicate a static website, right? Like if you were to go to, I don't know, the React docs or something, right? Static text content, you could say, okay, this is going to be an H1, this is going to be some sort of subheading thing, this is a paragraph, these are links. And if you know HTML, like you can take this and directly translate it to React. And you can get pretty far with that. But then at that point, like you're basically just writing HTML. Like why not just write HTML, right? So be more interesting if we could make a dynamic. If we could say hello to something other than the whole world. Maybe we want to say hello to a certain person. So if we create a variable called name, say like maybe Dave, we can render that name using single curly braces inside of JSX, and that is going to render out that element. And so let me switch this back to the create element version so you can see what this is actually doing. So we have our hello and our world, right? This is literally just like render the variable name inside span. And if we want a space, well, we need a space. So now we have 3 children. There's a span, there's a space, and there's a span. And that's what this is doing. So like any sort of JavaScript expressions you throw into here, if it's just the expression, this will be fine. If you do like, I don't don't know, some other characters, then I'm not actually sure what it compiles to. So you can play around with this and just kind of see what it does. This will work fine, right? It may try to split that up and like put this as its own element, like group all the strings together. I'm not actually sure that would be equivalent, right? But yeah, so we've got these variables now, and this is a little bit closer to something dynamic, right? We can parameterize things, I guess. But it would be cool if we could pass arguments to our function, like pass in the name and have it render the name that way, right? That'd be more useful. Objects are not valid as a React child. That's interesting. That's a cool error. Oh yeah, because I think this is undefined, and you can't render undefined, or you can. So that's curious. Ah, okay. So this thing is this is the props object actually. So when you call a component this way, it gets an object called props as the first argument, and you can't render objects. If we log out props, we can see here props. There we go. Yeah, so the props is an empty object, and you can't render just like bare objects in React. It won't let you do that. So you can render properties of it though. So if we pass in an attribute here, now you can see this object that we get has name, right? And it's a regular plain object. There's no fancy Reactness here, but it's just kind of bundled up all the attributes and passed them in as an object. And so we could render the name out like this now. Or probably more commonly, if you see most React code will, instead of like taking a props variable and just accessing things with props dot whatever, they'll destructure the props, which is like just it's a JavaScript syntax thing. So we could destructure name out of props and just render the name that way. And you can go one step further with this and just move this into the argument list. And now we don't have props anymore, we just have name. So now we've got a component that can take dynamic data and render it out. Let's go back to the create element version again and see, kind of rewrite this. So we have our div with the two spans, and we've got the name, and we've got name coming in like this. Cool. Well, so that didn't really change. Let's rewrite this one though as create element. You can see what this looks like. So let me get rid of that. We'll say react.create element. And what are we creating? We're creating a hello component. And that second argument that I've been leaving blank all along is the props that we're going to pass in. So we pass in an object with a name. And it has no children, so we can leave those off. And we get the same thing. So this is equivalent to that. We're rendering hello, passing in props. And you can pass in multiple things. We have a class name, person, class name, person. These are equivalent. Why or when would you use create element versus a function component? That's a good question. So this is what React is compiling stuff down to. If you're using like a development server or something, Babel behind the scenes is like compiling this JSX down to create element calls. And I would say you pretty much never need to create elements manually. You can just use JSX. There's nothing you can do with create element that you can't do with plain old JSX. So I would just use this. But I think it's kind of I don't know. Personally, I kind of like to know what this is doing under the hood. So that's why we're playing around with create element, just to kind of get an idea of like, what is React doing? Why is this so? What's up with this magical HTML stuff? Because this is just JavaScript at this point. It's just regular function calls. But yeah, unless you like pain, I wouldn't write these out manually. It's a lot easier to go than write regular JSX. Yeah, so let's swap back to our regular looking JSX stuff again. Do that, get rid of this. So, cool. All right. So we've got props. We can render dynamic stuff. If we wanted to create a web page that had some like dynamic stuff in it, I don't know, numbers, names, whatever, we can do that. Neat. But so that's JSX and props, and the next important thing is state. I think that's really that's what sets React apart from just like plain old HTML, really. And that's where components become interactive. So for that, we've got React provides a couple things. We could either rewrite this as a class component, and classes can have state built in, or we can import the use state hook, which was added earlier this year. We can call use state inside our component and pass in some sort of initial value, like, I don't know, maybe it's a number or something. And use state returns an array. If we log out state, we can see we've got these two items here. 42 is the number that we passed in as our initial value, and the second argument, or the second element, is a function to update that state. So we can use those in our component. We can like render out this value down below. Maybe we have another div, and we just put out state 0. Right, pull out that first item and render out the 42. But more commonly, you would destructure this here, and then maybe put that in a variable called number, and then call that function set number. And now we can render out the number down here. And we can't log out state anymore because we don't have state. Set number is assigned a value but never used. That makes sense because we haven't used it. So, okay, cool. So we have this number rendering out. Nothing's really happening yet. Let's add a button. And we can change the number. So when we click the button, click me, this has to, this will take a function. We'll write an arrow function in here, and we're going to call set number with, well, let's say we'll just set it to 99. Then we click the button, and we're setting the number. So when we change state like this, React is going to re-render the component. So when you call this, React basically calls your component again, and then it updates the DOM to match whatever you returned. So that's what's going on there. Let me check the chat. Could I talk about architecture? Yeah, so ordering files is, yeah, sort of a whole ball of wax, I guess. It really depends on like how big your project is. I usually start with, honestly, for most like simple projects, I'll start just throwing everything in the source directory. And then at some point, like as it grows, I might group them into like a components directory or like pages if I've got pages. Ultimately, like React doesn't care how you organize stuff, and Create React App doesn't care how you organize your files. It'll just find everything under source. So under there, it's just like it's a free for all. You can do whatever you want. For a while, the recommendation was to split stuff up into components and containers. And Dan Abramov wrote an article about that back in like 2015 or something. And I think he's since changed his thinking on that because people sort of like latched onto that and were like, okay, cool, components and containers, that's all I'm going to do now. And it turns out that that doesn't really work all that well all the time. So the trouble is it's hard to have like hard and fast rules about that file organization stuff. I would kind of like group like things together. The simplest thing is just start throwing them all in one directory and then split them up as you need to. What are the brackets for with state before I destructured? So when it was like this is an array. And we're just going to comment out this line here. Comment out line 2. Actually, no, this is state 0. So yeah, so this state is an array, and this is how you access elements in arrays in JavaScript. So one thing I think it makes React a lot easier to learn if you have a good background in JavaScript first. I don't think it's like required, but I do think like learning JavaScript and React at the same time is going to be harder than if you learn some JavaScript on its own, just like write some little toy things that, manipulate numbers or whatever, just to get the syntax down and like start to understand functions and arrays and objects and all that kind of stuff. Because so much of this React stuff, this all builds on JavaScript, right? Like this inside these braces, this is JavaScript syntax. This is not React syntax. This stuff right here, like this is a function call that's returning an array. Most of the React stuff you see is JavaScript. And I think if you're coming at it from the angle of like, I'm going to learn React and JavaScript at the same time, it gets really hard to tell what's what. Which is a problem then when you like go to Google for like, how do I do blah in React? Because it's like, it's a JavaScript problem. And it's hard to know that without kind of like learning things in a linear way. Cool. So any other questions about kind of like basic React stuff? Props state JSX. Drop questions in the chat if you got them. Let me look at my notes here. Cool. All right. How can I make a simple layout? So layout is a CSS problem. So yeah, I think like React will get your elements on the page, and after that, it's up to CSS to actually lay them out. And so you can apply classes. So like this, for instance, let's you've got header. What'd you say? Header, main, and footer. So we could do that inside our div here, but ultimately I think we get into CSS pretty quickly. So if we have like header here, I'm just going to make this We have a header, a main, and footer. If we just lay these out like this, these are going to be block level elements. And block level is like a CSS term. So they each take their own line. I think for this, it's super helpful to use the dev tools. Click on this little inspector thingy and you can click on elements and change their properties here. Oh, how to pass a route element to another view? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not totally sure what you mean, but I think if you're using a router, the router is going to have like nested components, and router, depending on which library you're using, I think React router will like render its children whenever that route matches. Yeah, it'll depend. Any ideas for beginner projects? Yeah, I'm going to talk more about beginner projects tomorrow, I think. Because that's a big topic. I think there's lots of cool stuff you can do, but I think it helps to like kind of scope it down to the sort of like one step beyond your current abilities. Sort of the idea of deliberate practice, if you've heard of that. Like the idea is to figure out where you are now, and then like practice with things that are a little bit harder, kind of a little bit outside your comfort zone. Instead of like, you don't want to jump too far. Like if you're just learning React, I would say like, don't try to build like a full stack app as your practice project. Like it can be tempting to feel like, oh yeah, I'll just learn all the things at the same time. And if I pick a really big project, like I'll touch all the different pieces. But the problem is like you end up doing that and you kind of only come away with some knowledge. Like you get really surface level knowledge about a ton of things. And that's not great. I think it's better to like focus on one thing at a time. So yeah, tomorrow probably also 2 p.m. Eastern, I think we'll chat about practice projects and stuff. So create React app versus Gatsby. I would start with create React app. Gatsby is neat, but it's way more advanced. Like it also bundles in like you're using GraphQL, and there's a bunch of like Gatsby specific configuration stuff. It's a lot to learn at the same time, I think. Yeah. Use state sets state, which is used for pulling variables into render. Yeah, so use state creates a piece of state. So every time you call use state, like we could have a few of them, 100 other numbers. Each call to use state is going to create like another kind of holding spot for a piece of state. And then these variables are now like useState returns the value that it created. So these are all accessible inside the component. Cool. So I think that's how callbacks work in React. Yeah, okay, so we talked a little bit about, we had a button earlier. Where'd that button go? Undo a bunch. Button. Back to that. So we have this button here has this on-click callback. So callbacks, the standard DOM events like click and mouse move and stuff like that. They're all camel cased in React. So with plain HTML, they were all lowercase. Like you'd have on click like this, on click. But React camel cases them, and they take a function. So this is the way you pass a function in. You've got to pass it in braces, because if you don't use braces, how is it going to know where the function ends? Anytime you see braces in JSX, like open brace, the stuff inside those braces is going to be like plain old JavaScript at that point. this is how you pass. You're creating a function here and passing it in. And then when you click the button, it calls this function here. Can you pass in an object? Do you mean to... I'm not sure where you mean. And there's also a super long delay between this video and the chat, so sorry. Yeah, passing an object into set state or into use state, you can do that. You can pass any value in here. You can pass an array. And I think actually, yeah, React will render an array. If you pass an object, we get that problem again where you can't render objects. So we could, whatever. This is now like an object. This is object.a is going to render 5. Yeah, you can pass whatever you want. The trick with objects is that if you're going to set them, whatever you pass into the setter is going to replace the whole object. So if you want to update like one sub property, you've got to be careful about doing it immutably, and it's something to watch out for. So yeah, use state creates state. It creates a kind of a holding place for a piece of state, and then set state, or I guess in this case set number, is a thing that changes that state, and then that's how you change the value. So you can't just you can't just say like object.a equals 42 or whatever. Like you could, I mean, I guess you could, but it's not gonna re-render the component. If you do this in here, see, it doesn't do anything. So calling the setter with a new value tells React like, hey, this thing's changed. I want you to call the whole component again and kind of recompute everything. Gatsby is like a static site generator for React. I was going to say blog generator, but it's more than that. So it can pull data from different places. Like it can pull data from markdown files and render those. It can do, it's got like GraphQL support for, well, everything kind of is exposed as GraphQL, but you can also pull data from APIs and display stuff from APIs and stuff like that. It's pretty cool, but it's also complex. I would not start with Gatsby if you're getting into React. Play around with React by itself before you get into Gatsby for sure. Cool. Well, I think that's all the time we've got for today. Tune in tomorrow, probably same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll send an email around if you're on my mailing list. You should get that. If you aren't on my mailing list, I'm not sure how you're here, but davesedia.com/newsletter if you want to get that email tomorrow. Cool. And yeah, I'm working on a course. There's more news about that coming soon. Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming. See you later.